Hello, welcome to the Heartbreak Stories channel. Today's story is one of those that hits you right in the chest. A man walks into a party he wasn't invited to and discovers that the two people he trusted most have been living a secret life behind his back. Now let's listen.
I showed up at a party my wife said was just a girls' night. The front door was wide open. The music was loud, and the man standing too close to her on the back patio was someone I'd trusted more than anyone outside my own blood. She froze when she saw me. What I said next made 50 people go silent. But that night was only the surface. What was hiding underneath was far worse. My name is Dean Tanner. I'm 45 years old. I've been a plant shift supervisor at Allegheny Steel Processing in Youngstown, Ohio, for the last 11 years. Before that, I worked the floor, welding, cutting, hauling steel until my shoulders ached and my hands looked like old leather. I built my way up. Nobody handed me anything. I married my wife, Delaney, when I was 24 and she was 21. We had our son Landon a few years later. He just turned 14. For most of those years, I thought we were solid. Not perfect, nobody is, but solid. Turns out, I was the only one who believed that. It was a Saturday in early October. Delaney told me she was going to her friend Amber's birthday party. A small thing, just some of the girls from her gym and a few neighbors. She left around 6 in a black dress I hadn't seen before, heels that looked brand new, and enough perfume to fill a parking garage. I remember thinking she looked beautiful. I also remember thinking she hadn't dressed like that for me in a long time, but I pushed it aside. That's what I always did. Push things aside. Around 8:30, I got a text from my buddy Glenn. Short, casual. Hey man, you coming to Amber's thing? Heard it's getting pretty lively over there. I stared at the screen for a second. Glenn knew about the party. Delaney never mentioned it was anything more than a girls' night. I texted back asking what he meant by lively. He didn't respond. Something shifted in my chest. Not suspicion exactly. More like a door opening that I hadn't noticed was there. I grabbed my truck keys, told Landon I'd be back in an hour, and drove across town to Amber's house. The street was packed with cars. Music thumped from inside. I could see people through the front window, way more than a small birthday gathering. I parked a block away and walked up the driveway. The front door was wide open. A banner above the entrance read "Surprise" in gold letters, but nobody seemed surprised by anything anymore. The party was in full swing. I stepped inside. A few heads turned. Someone waved. Chris, Amber's husband, spotted me from the kitchen doorway and raised his beer with a confused grin, like he wasn't sure whether I belonged there or not. I nodded, kept moving. I scanned the living room, the hallway, the dining area. No Delaney. Then I heard her laugh. That particular laugh, light, flirty, rehearsed, coming from the back patio. I hadn't heard that laugh directed at me in years. I moved through the crowd and reached the sliding glass door. Through the glass, I saw her. Delaney was leaning against the patio railing, a wine glass dangling from her fingers, her other hand resting on the chest of a man I knew very well. Reed Keegan, my son's godfather, the man I'd chosen to stand beside me at Landon's christening, the man who came to our Thanksgiving dinners, who helped me build the deck in our backyard, who I once called at 2 in the morning when Landon had a seizure and I needed someone to follow the ambulance. Reed's hand was on her waist, not casually, not friendly. His thumb was tracing small circles just above her hip, and she was leaning into it like it was the most natural thing in the world. She whispered something into his ear, and he smiled, slow, familiar, comfortable. My throat tightened. My hands balled into fists at my sides. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. Then I pulled the sliding door open. The sound of the door grinding along the track made them both turn. Delaney's face went white. The wine glass in her hand tilted and red splashed onto the concrete. Reed stepped back, but not fast enough. Not nearly fast enough. I looked at her, then at him, then back at her. This the girls' night you mentioned? My voice came out flat, steady, like I was reading a shift report. The patio went silent. 3 or 4 people who had been standing nearby turned to stone. Someone inside lowered the music, or maybe it just felt that way. Delaney opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Reed raised both hands like he was trying to calm storm. Dean, listen, this isn't. Don't. I cut him off. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Not here. Not ever. I turned back to Delaney. She had that look, the one where she was already calculating, already building the story she was going to sell me later. I'd seen it before on small things. I just never thought I'd see it standing in the wreckage of my entire marriage. How long? I asked. She shook her head. Dean, please, not here. Let's go home and... How long, Delaney? Her chin dropped. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence told me everything. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This was a life she'd been living behind mine. I unexpectedly showed up at a surprise party and caught my wife's betrayal. She froze the moment she saw me, and what I said after stunned everyone standing on that patio. You picked our son's godfather, I said quietly. You let me trust him with my boy, and then you gave him everything that was supposed to be ours. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I turned around and walked back through the house. Past the staring faces, past the half-eaten cake, past Chris who was standing frozen with a bottle opener in his hand. I didn't run. I didn't slam anything. I just walked out the front door, down the driveway, and into the October cold. Behind me, I heard Delaney call my name. Once. Twice. I didn't stop. I drove for over an hour without a destination. Just the dark highway, the hum of the engine, and this sick hollow feeling spreading through my chest like spilled oil on concrete. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. First Delaney, then Glenn, then Delaney again. I didn't touch it. I ended up in the parking lot of a truck stop off I-80, engine idling, hands locked around the steering wheel. The fluorescent lights above cast everything in that ugly yellow glow that makes the whole world look like a bad photograph. I sat there replaying it. Reed's hand on her waist, her leaning into him, that laugh, that face she made when she saw me. Not guilt, not shame, just pure inconvenience. Like I was a delivery that showed up on the wrong day. Eventually, I picked up the phone. 19 missed calls. 12 texts. I scrolled through Delaney's messages one by one. Dean, please come home. We need to talk about this like adults. You're blowing this out of proportion. It wasn't what it looked like. Ree and I are friends. You're seeing things that aren't there. Friends. The word hit me like a slap. I'd seen friends. I've been friends with people my whole life. Friends don't trace circles on each other's hips in the dark while hiding from party. The last message was the one that dug the deepest. If you loved me enough to listen, you'd come home instead of running away like a child. I stared at that sentence until my vision blurred. She cheated. She got caught. And somehow, within 2 hours, she'd already made it my fault. I called my younger brother, Ray. He picked up on the second ring, voice groggy. I told him I needed a place for the night. He didn't ask why, just said the side door was unlocked and there were clean towels in the hall closet. That's the thing about Ray. He knew when to talk and when to just leave the light on. I got to his place around midnight, sat on the guest bed in my work boots, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. Anger did, but not the kind that burns hot and fast. This was slow, deep, the kind that settles into your bones and rewires the way you see everything. Every late night, she worked. Every weekend, she said she was at her mother's. Every time I asked if something was wrong, and she looked at me like I was paranoid. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. I just didn't trust myself enough to believe it. The next morning, I showered, borrowed one of Ray's shirts, and drove to the plant. Clocked him like nothing happened. Ran the morning briefing, checked the press line calibrations, signed off on the safety logs. My guys could tell something was off. I caught a few sideways looks, but nobody said a word. That's the culture on the floor. You don't pry. You just show up. Around noon, Glenn texted me. Hey brother, you okay? I heard things got rough last night. I read it twice. Then I typed back. How long did you know? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then nothing. For 40 minutes, nothing. Finally, his reply came through. A couple months, maybe. I saw them at a restaurant in Warrenback in August. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I didn't want to start something if I was wrong. I put the phone down, picked up a wrench, sat back down. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from the weight of realizing that the people I trusted most had all decided I didn't deserve the truth. Glenn had been my closest friend for 9 years. We'd worked the same shifts, gone hunting together, helped each other move furniture. He'd sat in my kitchen drinking my coffee, looking my wife in the eye, knowing what she was doing behind my back. And he said nothing. Not a hint. Not a warning. Not even a vague, "Hey, everything good at home?" I didn't respond to his text. Not that day. Not ever. Some silences say more than any words could, and the one I gave Glenn was the loudest thing I'd ever said. That evening, I drove back to Ray's. Landon had texted me twice asking where I was. I told him I had an early shift and was crashing at Uncle Ray's. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. 14 years old, and no idea his whole world was about to shift beneath him. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands and made a decision. No more guessing. No more hoping. Tomorrow, I was calling a lawyer. Donald Underwood's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, wedged between a tax preparer and a dentist. The carpet was gray, the chairs were old, and the diploma on the wall was from Case Western, class of '96. None of that mattered. What mattered was the way he listened. No nodding along, no fake sympathy. He just sat there with his pen flat on the desk and let me talk. I told him everything. The party, Reed, the messages, Glenn, all of it. When I finished, Donald leaned back and tapped his pen twice. First thing we do is pull financials. Joint accounts, credit cards, anything with both your names on it. If she's been planning this, there'll be a trail. He wasn't wrong. The forensic accountant he brought in, a quiet woman named Sheila who looked like she audited people's souls for a living, took 3 days to assemble the picture. When she laid it out on Donald's desk, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Over the past 2.5 years, Delaney had withdrawn just over $91,000 from our joint savings and a home equity line I didn't even know she'd opened. The withdrawals were small, $300 here, $450 there, spaced out so they'd never trigger a flag. She'd been bleeding our accounts dry like a slow leak in a pipe you don't notice until the basement floods. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the house. Our house. The one I put a down payment on with money I saved working double shifts for 3 years. 4 months before the party, Delaney had gone to a notary and transferred the deed into her mother Gail's name. My signature on the transfer document was forged, a clumsy imitation that didn't even match my handwriting on the mortgage application sitting right next to it in the file. That's not just grounds for a favorable divorce settlement, Donald noted, flipping through the pages. That's fraud, potentially criminal. I sat there staring at the numbers. $91,000. Our son's college fund, the one I've been building since he was 2, had $43,000 in it last time I checked. Sheila pulled it up. Current balance, $612. She'd gutted it. Every last dollar. Landon's future, scraped clean to fund whatever exit strategy she'd been building with Reed. Where did the money go? I asked. Sheila slid a printout across the desk. Monthly payments to a property management company in Akron. $1,800 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment leased under Delaney's maiden name. Gift purchases from a men's jewelry store. 2 plane tickets to Nashville last March, a weekend I thought she was visiting her cousin in Pittsburgh. She'd been living a second life. Not on impulse, not out of passion, with spreadsheets and planning. While I was pulling overtime to cover the mortgage, she was siphoning our savings into a world I didn't know existed. I looked at Donald. What do? We file, and we don't negotiate. She committed fraud with the deed transfer, and she drained marital assets without consent. In Ohio, that changes the math considerably. He paused. But Dean, she's going to fight. Women like this don't surrender. They escalate. He had no idea how right he was. That evening, I drove past our house. Didn't stop, just slowed down. The lights were on in the kitchen. Landon's bedroom window glowed blue from his computer screen. Everything looked normal. Peaceful even. Like a postcard from a life that had already burned to the ground, but hadn't finished falling yet. I thought about knocking on the door, grabbing my son, telling him everything. But he was 14. He didn't need his father's war dropped into his lap. Not yet. Not like this. So I drove on. Back to Ray's. Back to the guest room that was starting to feel less temporary and more like a foxhole. I sat on the bed and opened the file Sheila had given me. Page after page of transactions, dates, amounts. Every line was a lie Delaney had told me. Every withdrawal was a moment she'd looked me in the eye and pretended we were fine. I closed the folder, set on the nightstand, and turned off the light. Tomorrow we file. 3 days after Donald filed the divorce papers, I came back to Ray's apartment after a 10-hour shift and found 2 Youngstown police officers standing outside the door. A man and a woman, both in uniform, both wearing expressions that told me this wasn't a social call. "Dean Tanner," the female officer asked. "That's me." "Sir, we need to speak with you regarding a complaint filed by your wife, Delaney Tanner." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face still. 11 years supervising a steel plant teaches you how to stay calm when everything around you is on fire. "What kind of complaint?" They told me Delaney had gone to the station that morning and filed a report claiming I had threatened her during a phone call 2 nights prior. She alleged I told her I would make her regret everything and that she feared for her safety. I hadn't spoken to Delaney since the party. Not one word. Not one call. The phone records would prove it. "Officers," I replied steadily, "I haven't spoken to my wife in over a week. I haven't called her, texted her, or been within a mile of that house. My attorney can confirm the timeline, and my phone records will show exactly 0 contact." The male officer shifted his weight. He looked uncomfortable, like he knew this was thin but had to follow through anyway. "Sir, a temporary protective order has been issued. You're required to stay at least 500 feet from the residence and from Mrs. Tanner." "My son lives in that house," I said, and my voice held steady, but something inside me fractured. "The order doesn't restrict contact with your minor child, but any arrangements need to go through the court or a third party." They handed me the paperwork. I signed where they pointed. They left. I stood in the hallway for a long time, holding that document. The woman who had lied to me, stolen from me, betrayed me with my son's godfather. She had just used the legal system to make me look like the threat. She couldn't beat me in truth, so she tried to beat me with a badge and a signature. I called Donald immediately. He wasn't surprised. "It's a classic move," he said flatly. "She's trying to establish a narrative. Dangerous husband, scared wife. It gives her leverage in custody discussions and makes you look unstable." He paused. "The good news is it's going to collapse. We have phone records, we have financial fraud documentation, and we have a forged deed transfer. Her credibility is a house of cards, Dean. We just need to let it fall on its own schedule. And in the meantime, I can't see my son. You can. It just has to be coordinated. I'll file a motion for temporary visitation by end of day." I hung up and sat down on Ray's couch. The anger I'd been controlling since that night on the patio finally rose up like heat from a furnace. Not loud, not reckless, just heavy and steady and everywhere at once. She was willing to use the police against me. She was willing to put a restraining order between me and my own boy. Not because she was afraid, because she was losing control, and this was the only weapon she had left. That night, Ray came home and found me sitting at the kitchen table with a protective order, the financial audit, and a beer I hadn't touched. "That bad?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. "She told the cops I threatened her." Ray pulled out a chair and sat across from me. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, quietly, "What do you need?" "I need to not become the man she's describing," I answered, "because that's what she's counting on." Ray nodded slowly. "Then don't." Simple as that. 2 words, and they were exactly what I needed to hear. I went to bed that night thinking about Landon, about how he was sleeping under a roof I paid for, in a room I'd painted, next to a mother who had turned his father into a ghost with 1 phone call. And the hardest part wasn't the injustice. It was knowing that my boy might be hearing her version of the story right now, and believing it. I stared at the ceiling until sleep finally came. It wasn't rest. It was just the body surrendering before the mind was ready. Donald got the protective order, hearing moved up. Took 4 days instead of the usual 2 weeks. He called in a favor with the clerk's office. When we walked into that courtroom, I had a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Phone records showing 0 contact with Delaney since the party, cell tower data confirming I was at Ray's apartment every night she claimed I was lurking near the house, and the financial audit that turned her entire victim story inside out. Delaney's attorney, a young guy in a suit that didn't fit right, tried to argue that I had a pattern of intimidation. Donald stood up, laid the phone records on the judge's desk, and let the silence do the work. The judge reviewed them for about 90 seconds, then looked at Delaney over the rim of his glasses. "Mrs. Tanner, There is no evidence of any contact between you and your husband during the period in question. None. The protective order was dissolved. I could see my son again. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. It was what I found that night when I got back to Ray's and finally sat down with Delaney's cloud backup. We still shared a family iCloud account. One of those things you set up years ago and never think about again. Her messages synced automatically. I hadn't looked before because I wasn't ready. Now I was. The conversation with Reed went back 14 months. Not 8, not 6. 14 months of messages, voice notes, shared photos of restaurants and hotel lobbies. They had a system. She used a code name for him in her contacts. Dr. Elliot, like he was a dentist appointment, she kept every Thursday. But the thread that gutted me wasn't the one with Reed. It was the one with her sister, Pauline. Delaney had laid out her entire exit strategy in a series of messages spanning 7 months. She told Pauline she was going to phase Dean out gradually. She described how she'd been telling friends that we were living like roommates, sleeping in separate rooms, drifting apart. None of it was true. We shared a bed every single night until the week I left. She wrote about the house transfer, how she found a notary in Akron who didn't ask too many questions. She wrote about draining the savings, just small amounts. He never checks the statements. And then, in a message dated 4 months before the party, she wrote something that made me set the phone down and stare at the wall for 10 minutes. Once Reed and I are settled, I'll tell Landon that Dean chose to leave. Kids believe what their mothers tell them. He'll come around. She wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to erase me from my own son's life and rewrite the story so that I was the one who walked away. I forwarded every message to Donald. Then I sat in the dark and thought about Landon, about all the small ways Delaney might have already started poisoning the well. The offhand comments, the sighs when I came home late, the way she'd sometimes say, right in front of him, "Your father works so much, it's like he doesn't even live here." I called Landon the next morning, kept it light, asked about school, about his basketball tryouts, about the dog. Then, carefully, I asked him something I've been dreading. "Landon, has Mom said anything to you about me lately? Anything that confused you or didn't sound right?" He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, "She told me you didn't want to live with us anymore, that you picked work over your family." My chest tightened so hard I could feel my heartbeat in my temples. "That's not true, son. Not a single word of it. I want you to know that." "Then why aren't you here, Dad?" "Because sometimes the truth takes a little longer to sort out than the lies. But I'm not going anywhere. You hear me?" "Yeah," he said softly. "I hear you." I hung up and pressed the phone against my forehead. She'd already started. The campaign to turn my boy against me was already in motion, dripping into his ears like slow water wearing down stone. But now I had the proof. Every message, every plan, every calculated lie, saved, time-stamped, and sitting in my lawyer's inbox. She wanted to rewrite the story. I was about to hand the judge the original draft. The custody evaluation was scheduled for a Thursday. Donald had arranged temporary visitation. Every other weekend, Wednesday evenings, but it wasn't enough. Landon was slipping. I could hear in his voice during our calls shorter answers, longer silences, the way he'd say, "I guess," instead of "yeah," like something inside him was slowly dimming. Then on a Tuesday night, my phone rang at 11:15. Landon's name on the screen. "Dad." His voice was thin, shaky. "Can you come get me?" I was already reaching for my keys. "What happened?" "He's here. Reed. He's sleeping in your bed." Mom moved his stuff into the closet. "There's shaving cream in the bathroom that isn't yours and shoes by the door that aren't yours, and I can't." His voice broke. "I can't stay here, Dad. Please. I'm on my way. Pack a bag. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I drove 15 over the speed limit the entire way. When I pulled up, Landon was sitting on the front porch steps with a backpack and his basketball shoes tied together by the laces, hanging over his shoulder. He looked small in the porch light, smaller than a 14-year-old should look. He climbed into the truck without a word. We drove in silence for a few miles. Then he spoke. "She told me you were the one who ruined everything, that you embarrassed her at Amber's party and made up lies about Reed to get attention." I gripped the steering wheel and said nothing for a moment. "Then what do you think?" "I think she's lying." because Reed's been coming around since last summer, and she used to send me to my room whenever he showed up. She told me he was helping with the taxes. He looked at me. Nobody does taxes at 10 o'clock at night, Dad.
A 14-year-old calling his dad at 11 at night because another man is sleeping in his father's bed. That's heartbreaking. Dean didn't hesitate for a second. That's what a real father does.
Despite everything, I almost smiled. The kid was sharper than either of us gave him credit for. I'm sorry you had to carry that, I told him quietly. I just want to stay with you. Then you're staying with me. I called Donald first thing in the morning and told him Landon was with me. He advised me to file an emergency modification to the custody arrangement. The presence of a romantic partner in the marital home, especially one involved in the infidelity, was grounds for a change. He also told me something I hadn't expected. Reed Keegan has filed a defamation lawsuit against you. I set down my coffee. He did what? He's claiming that your public confrontation at the party and subsequent statements to mutual acquaintances caused damage to his reputation and his business. He's asking for $75,000 in damages. The man who had betrayed my trust, slept with my wife, moved into my house, and displaced my son from his own bed was now suing me for hurting his feelings. I laughed, not because it was funny, because the absurdity of it had reached a level where laughter was the only sane response. Can he win? I asked. Not a chance, Donald replied. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Everything you said was factual, but he can drag you through the process and cost you legal fees, which is probably the point. He paused. I'll file a motion to dismiss. And Dean, this actually helps us. It shows the court that he's aggressive, retaliatory, and more concerned with his image than with the damage he's caused to a child. Judges noticed that. That afternoon, I sat with Landon at Ray's kitchen table and helped him with his algebra homework. He was behind, hadn't been turning in assignments for 3 weeks. I didn't lecture him. I just sat there, worked through the problems with him, and let the normalcy of it speak for itself. At one point, he looked up and said, Dad, are we going to be okay? I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was small. Yeah, buddy, we're going to be just fine. He nodded and went back to his equations. And for the first time since that night on the patio, I believed my own words. Reed showed up at Ray's apartment on a Wednesday evening. No call, no warning, just 3 sharp knocks and a voice I hadn't heard since the patio. Dean, open up. We need to settle this like men. Landon was in the guest room doing homework. I told him to stay put, then walked to the door and opened it halfway. Reed stood on the landing in a leather jacket and jeans, arms at his sides, trying to look relaxed. He wasn't. His left hand was fidgeting with his car keys, and his jaw was clenched tight enough to bend steel. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me. My phone was in my back pocket recording. Donald had told me to document every interaction from here on out. Smart advice from a smart man. Say what you came to say. I told him. Reed exhaled like he'd rehearsed this in the mirror. Delaney told me you two were done. She said you've been living separate lives for over a year. She said the marriage was just paperwork. And you believe that. I had no reason not to. You had every reason, Reed. You sat at my table. You drank my beer. You watched me coach my son's basketball team while you were going behind my back with his mother. I kept my voice low, steady, the way I'd talk to a new hire who just broke a safety protocol. You didn't believe her because she was convincing. You believed her because it made what you were doing feel smaller. He shifted his weight. The keys jangled. I didn't come here to fight. Good. Because this isn't a fight. It's a conversation you're going to wish you never started. I folded my arms. Your name to my divorce filing. The financial records show transfers from my wife's accounts to fund your little arrangement. The apartment in Akron, the Nashville trip, the jewelry. My attorney has it all. Reed's face went pale. That's between you and Delaney. It was until you filed a $75,000 defamation suit against me for telling people the truth. You made yourself part of the case, Reed. I didn't drag you in. You jumped. You stepped back like the hallway had gotten smaller. I'll drop the suit. Too late. It's on record. And my lawyer is using it to demonstrate a pattern of retaliation from your side. Judges don't like that. I paused. Neither will Dana. His head snapped up. Leave my wife out of this. Your wife is already in this. She just doesn't know it yet. But she will. Because the court filings are public record, and your name is all over them. Reed's mouth opened, closed. He looked like a man standing in a house he'd just realized was on fire with no exits in sight. Walk away, Reed, I said quietly. From the lawsuit. From Delaney. From my family. That's the best advice anyone's ever going to give you. He turned without another word and walked down the stairs. I heard his car start, then pull away. I stood in the hallway until the sound disappeared, then went back inside. Landon was standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching me. Was that him? I nodded. What did he say? Nothing that mattered. He studied my face for a few seconds, then turned and went back to his room. The kid didn't push. He was learning, the hard way, too young, that some answers come in their own time. The next morning, Donald called with news. Delaney's attorney withdrew from her case, filed a motion to withdraw, citing irreconcilable differences with the client. Meaning what? Meaning he looked at the evidence, the forged deed, the drained accounts, the false police report, the cloud messages, and decided his license wasn't worth the liability. Donald's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. She's going to need new counsel, and whoever takes this case is going to charge her double, because nobody wants to defend a sinking ship. I thought about Delaney sitting somewhere right now, scrambling through phone books and Google searches, try to find someone willing to stand next to her in court and pretend that what she did was defensible. Good luck with that. Dana Keegan called me on a Friday afternoon. I didn't expect it, didn't even recognize the number at first. But when she said her name, I sat down at Ray's kitchen table and listened. Her voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of someone holding themselves together with their fingernails. I found the court filing online, she said. Reed told me it was a misunderstanding, that you were exaggerating. But the documents don't lie, do they? No, I replied. They don't. She asked me what I knew. I told her, plainly, without embellishment, the 14 months, the apartment, the Nashville trip, the way he acted at the party, comfortable and unashamed, like this was his life and I was the interruption. She was quiet for a long time. Then he told me he was at a conference that weekend, the Nashville one. He even brought back a keychain from the Grand Ole Opry. I thought it was sweet. My jaw tightened. I didn't say anything. Some moments don't need commentary. They just need a witness. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. I know this isn't easy for you either. It isn't. But you deserve the truth. Nobody gave it to me, and I spent months walking around blind in my own home. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. After we hung up, I sat there for a while thinking about two families, mine and hers, both rigged with the same explosive and detonated by the same two people. Reed and Delaney hadn't just betrayed me. They'd pulled the pin on Dana's life too, and she didn't even know she was standing on the grenade until it was already in pieces. 2 days later, Donald called. The defamation suit was gone. Reed had filed to withdraw it, quietly, without explanation. Donald said Dana had likely given him an ultimatum. Drop the lawsuit or she walks. Either way, the legal board was clearing. The divorce proceedings moved fast after that. Delaney's new attorney, her third, was a tired-looking woman from Canton who spent most of the pre-trial hearing staring at the evidence like she was reading someone else's crime report. When Donald presented the forged deed, the drained savings, the hollowed college fund, and the cloud messages outlining Delaney's exit strategy, the courtroom went still. The judge didn't negotiate. He ruled. Full custody of Landon to me. Delaney got supervised visitation, twice a month, monitored at a family center. The house was ordered returned to joint ownership pending sale, and the proceeds split after restitution for the forged transfer. Delaney was ordered to repay the college fund in full. But I didn't want a house. Donald looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Dean, you're entitled to half the equity. I don't want it, I said. Let her keep it. Let her sit in that house alone with every room reminding her of what she blew up. She can have the walls. How about my son? Donald shook his head slowly but filed a waiver. I walked out of that courthouse with Landon beside me and nothing else. No house, no savings, no illusions. Just my boy, my job, and a clear road ahead. That night, I found out from Amber that Reed had moved out of his house. Dana had filed for separation the same week. He was staying in a motel off Route 11, the kind with weekly rates and vending machines in the hallway. No apartment in Akron. No Delaney. No family. Just a man sitting in a room he paid for by the week, staring at the walls of the life he'd built with someone else's wreckage. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't feel satisfied either. I just felt tired. The kind of tired that comes after you've been carrying something for so long you forgot what it felt like to stand straight. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Youngstown like a gray blanket nobody asked for, and life, my new life, started to take shape in ways I hadn't expected. Landon and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of town, close enough to his school that he could walk when the weather held. It wasn't much: thin walls, a kitchen the size of a closet, a parking lot view that made you appreciate curtains. But it was ours. No ghosts in the hallway. No lies baked into the walls. I kept working my shifts at the plant. The guys on the floor knew something had happened. Small town, loud mouths, but nobody brought it up directly. They just nodded a little harder when I walked in, left coffee on my desk without being asked, covered my breaks without complaint. That's how men handle things when they don't have the words. They show up. Landon was doing better. His grades were climbing back. He'd made the JV basketball team and was staying after practice most days to work on his shot. Some evenings I'd pick him up and we'd grab burgers at a diner on Market Street where the waitress knew our order by heart. He didn't talk much about Delaney. I didn't push. The counselor Donald had recommended was handling that, a calm, patient woman named Dr. Reeves who Landon actually seemed to trust, which was more than I could say for most adults in his life right now. Delaney's supervised visits were happening twice a month at a family center near the courthouse. Landon went, but he came back quieter each time. One evening, after a visit, he sat on the couch and stared at the television without turning it on. She cried the whole time, he said without looking at me. She kept saying she was sorry and that everything got out of control. I sat down next to him. How did that make you feel? He thought about it. Like she was sorry she got caught. Not sorry she did it. 14 years old. And he could already see the difference between remorse and performance. Reed was gone. Amber told me he'd moved to Columbus after Dana filed for divorce. Lost 2 clients from his consulting business when the court filings went public. Last anyone heard, he was renting a studio apartment and working for a staffing agency. The man who used to show up at my barbecues in a polo shirt talking about his portfolio was now filling out timesheets for temp work. I didn't celebrate that. I just noted it and moved on. Delaney's mother, Gail, called me one afternoon. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to. "Dean," she said, and her voice sounded 10 years older than the last time I'd heard it. "I want you to know that I had nothing to do with the house transfer." She told me she was refinancing and needed my name on the deed temporarily. I believed her. I shouldn't have, but I did. I was quiet for a moment. "I believe you, Gail. I raised her better than this," she said, and I heard something break in her voice. "I don't recognize her anymore." "Neither do I." She asked about Landon. I told her he was doing well. She asked if she could see him sometime. I told her I'd think about it, and I meant it. Gail wasn't the enemy. She was just another person standing in the blast radius of her daughter's choices. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late January, my phone rang. Delaney's number. I almost let it go, but Landon was at practice, the apartment was quiet, and some part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I married 21 years ago, picked up. Her voice was different. Not the sharp, calculated tone from the messages. Not the theatrical tears from the family center. This was something rawer, stripped down, like someone standing in an empty room with no audience left to perform for. "Reed left me," she said. "He moved to Columbus 3 weeks ago and stopped answering my calls. He took the furniture from the Akron apartment and closed the lease without telling me." I said nothing. I lost the house, Dean. The bank started foreclosure proceedings after I missed 2 payments. Mom won't co-sign another loan. Pauline isn't returning my calls. Her voice wavered. "I'm staying in a motel off Belmont Avenue, the one near the highway." I knew the place. Weekly rates. Ice machine in the hallway. The kind of place that smells like carpet cleaner and regret. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I made so many mistakes." I sat there in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, looking at the refrigerator door where Landon had pinned his basketball schedule with a magnet shaped like Ohio. And I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a deep, quiet sadness for the version of us that used to exist and never would again. Delaney, I said slowly, I'm sorry you're hurting. I really am. But I spent 21 years being your safety net. And every time I caught you, you jumped again. I paused. I can't be your backup plan. I won't be the man you come back to because every other option fell through. She was crying now, not the performative kind. Real, ugly, broken crying. I hope you figured out, I told her. For your sake and for Landon's. But you're going to have to do it without me. I hung up, set the phone on the counter, sat in the silence for a long time. It wasn't easy. Anyone who tells you walking away from 21 years feels clean is lying. But it was right. And sometimes right is the only compass you've got when everything else has been shattered. Spring came slow that year, the way it always does in Northeast Ohio. Grudgingly, like winter doesn't want to let go. But by mid-April, the trees along the Mahoning River were starting to green up, and the air had that raw, earthy smell that means the ground is waking up whether it wants to or not. Landon and I drove out to the river on a Saturday morning. No plan, no agenda. Just two people who needed to be somewhere that wasn't inside four walls. I packed a thermos of coffee. He brought a bag of pretzels and his basketball, which he took everywhere like a security blanket he'd never admit to needing. We parked near the old railroad bridge and walked down to the bank. The water was high from the snowmelt, brown and steady, pushing south toward the lake. Landon picked up a flat stone and skipped it, 3 hops before it sank. For as my record, he said. Mine's 6. No way. I found a smooth one, thin and oval, and sent it low across the surface. 5 skips. Close enough. He laughed. First real laugh I'd heard from him in months. Not polite, not forced, just a 14-year-old kid laughing at his old man, showing off by a river. I held on to that sound like it was made of glass. We threw stones for a while without talking. The river moved. The wind pushed through the trees. A train crossed the bridge overhead, shaking the ground beneath our feet, and we both looked up at the same time like we were watching the same thought pass above us. Then Landon sat down on a rock, elbows on his knees, and looked at the water. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever miss her? I didn't answer right away. I owed him honesty, and honesty takes a second to find when the truth is complicated. I miss who I thought she was, I said. The woman I married, the one I believed in. I miss her every day. But that woman and the one who did what she did, they're not the same person. Maybe they never were. Maybe I just wanted them to be. He nodded slowly, turning a stone over in his hands. She told me last visit that she's going to get better, that she's seeing a therapist and wants to earn my trust back. What do you think about that? I think people say a lot of things when they're losing. I looked at him, this kid who'd been forced to grow up faster than any 14-year-old should, who'd seen his mother unravel and his father rebuild, who'd packed a bag in the middle of the night and climbed into a truck without knowing where he'd sleep. You know what I think? I said, I think you're going to be just fine. Better than fine. He smiled. Not big, not flashy, just enough. Thanks, Dad. We stayed by the river for another hour. He taught me some basketball, movie he'd seen online. I taught him how to read the current, where the fish hide, where the bottom drops off, the way the water always finds the path of least resistance, even when the rocks try to send it somewhere else. At one point, he picked up a stone, held it for a moment, then threw it as far as he could, not skipping, just launching it into the center of the river where it disappeared with a heavy splash. What was that one for? I asked. He shrugged. Just felt like letting something go. I picked up a stone of my own. Smooth, cool, the size of a silver dollar. I thought about everything I carried for the past 4 months. The rage, the humiliation, the betrayal, the paperwork, the sleepless nights, the look on my son's face when he called me from a house that wasn't his home anymore. I threw it, watched it arc against the gray sky, and disappear into the current without a sound. Landon looked at me. Feel better? Yeah, I said. I think I do. We walked back to the truck as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. He tossed his basketball onto the back seat and climbed in beside me. I started the engine, pulled onto the road, and headed toward town. No looking back, no replaying, just a father and his son driving into whatever came next, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was enough to keep me steady.
What I respect about Dean is that no matter how hard they hit him, he never lost who he was. He stayed strong for his son, and that's what real men do. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.